Hey everyone, Brian from Human Japanese and Satori Reader here. Have you ever encountered a Japanese sentence with a simple expression like atama ga ii or ashi ga nagai, where the ga had for some reason transformed into a no? For example, atama no ii hito or ashi no nagai sensei. Well, that is a very common pattern, and it's what we're going to look at in this video. First, I'd like to say thanks to Jared E., who is the reader on SatoriReader.com, who most recently asked this question and prompted this video. So, Jared, I hope this is useful for you and for everyone else who's watching as well. All right, so let's dive right in. Very early on in our studies, we learned how to make simple sentences like this. Hanako-san wa ashi ga nagai. As for Hanako, the legs are long. Or in natural English, Hanako has long legs. Later on, we learned about relative clauses. And just to refresh your memory, a relative clause is simply where you have a fully formed sentence standing in front of a noun, and it becomes a description of that noun. So the prototypical example is something like Shinbun o yondeiru hito, and it means the person who is reading a newspaper. So if we take that example about the long legs, we could use that as a relative clause too. If we say ashi ga nagai hito, it means the person whose legs are long. So everyone following along so far? This is where it gets interesting. When you have a relative clause that contains the subject marker ga, that ga can optionally become no. So instead of ashi ga nagai hito, it could be ashi no nagai hito. And it means exactly the same thing. Now I know at this point, the thing you want to ask is, why would anyone do that if it means exactly the same thing? And we're going to come back to that. But first, let's just explore in a little bit more detail how we can use this pattern. All right? So let's try making a few more examples. So let's try a smart person. So in Japanese, when you're smart, your head is good. Atama ga ii. So a person whose head is good would be atama ga ii hito. Now there we have the relative clause, atama ga ii, so we can replace the ga with no, and it becomes atama no ii hito. All right? Let's try another one. A person who is tall. So in Japanese, when you're tall, your stature is high. Se ga takai. So a person who is tall would be se ga takai hito. And again, we have se, ga marking the subject se in the relative clause there, so that could become no instead. And we would get se no takai hito. Okay, let's try another one that works a little bit differently. Up until now, all of our examples have used the same pattern in the relative clause. Noun, ga, adjective. So, ashi ga nagai, atama ga ii, and so on. But it doesn't have to be this way. Any kind of relative clause is fine, even relative clauses that end in verbs. So, to demonstrate that, let's try this one. The letter that she wrote. Okay? So that's going to be the she wrote it letter. Kanojo ga kaita tegami. Now again, we have this relative clause here with ga marking the subject, so we can perform that substitution there, and we get kanojo no kaita tegami. All right, making sense so far? So now let's use this new skill in complete sentences. So what I'm going to do is throw out a couple sentences, and I want you to pause the video, take your time, make sure you can break things down and understand them, and then we'll talk about the sentences together. All right, so here's the first one. 背の高い人があそこに立っています. All right, how did you do? So in this sentence, 背の高い is the relative clause, and in its more basic form it would have been 背が高い. So it's a person whose stature is high, or a tall person. So the translation for this sentence is a person who is tall is standing over there. All right, let's try another one. In this sentence, I'm going to use the word 経験, which means experience. All right? 私は経験のある人を探しています. Okay, how did you do? So in this sentence, the relative clause is 経験のある, which in its more basic form would be 経験がある. There is experience, or someone has experience. So 経験のある人 is a person who has experience. And the sentence translation is, I'm looking for a person who has experience. All right, so one more example. This one is one that I happened to run into just by chance the other day when I was reading a manga. And so this is from Monster by Urasawa Naoki. And in this scene, Nina has been asked out to eat by Peta. So I've marked the place that we're going to be looking at together in yellow here. The only vocabulary word you might not be familiar with is this word sakuru. And what a sakuru is simply a club. It's often at the college level, but after classes, people often have some kind of sakuru that they're a part of. So here, Nina says, ごめん、ペータ。今日はサークルのある日だから. So the relative clause here is サークルのある. And in its more basic form, that would have been サークルがある, or I have サークル. So サークルのある日 is a day on which I have サークル. So the translation for the whole sentence is, today is a day on which I have my club. So, and omitted is, sorry, I can't go out to eat with you. All right, so let's return to the question that I know you've been dying to ask, which is, why would anyone do this? If just using ga is already completely functional, why would anyone go to the trouble of changing it to no and making it more confusing, right? Well, actually, that's just it. This can help to make sentences more clear. Let me show you why. Let's go back to a sentence we had earlier. And here's the version without the substitution. 背が高い人があそこに立っています. Now notice, we have the particle ga appearing twice. One is inside the relative clause and one is out in the main sentence. Now, that's not a problem. Japanese people can understand those kinds of sentences all day long with one hand tied behind their back. But look what happens when we change that first one to no instead. Now we have 背の高い人があそこに立っています. Now there's only one subject marked with ga, and it's the subject for the main sentence. So it helps to just improve the clarity slightly. Also, if you look at what happens when you're listening to that sentence in slow motion, when you hear 背が高い, at that moment, there's no way for you to know if you're out in the main sentence or if you're just in some kind of description. It's only when you hit the word 人, 背が高い人, that you realize, so everything I've heard up until now was a description of this person. And you kind of have to go back. But if you look at the version with no, 背の高い, by the time you get this far, you already know beyond the shadow of a doubt that you are currently inside of a relative clause that's going to be describing something that's coming up soon. So there's a tiny bit of early warning there. 背の高い can only be a description of the next noun. And so the whole thing just becomes a little bit more clear. And as sentences become longer and more complex, this kind of little aid to clarity can be really useful. Okay, so now let's talk about using and understanding this going forward. I've got two pieces of good news for you. The first is, this is around you everywhere. We just saw it together in a manga. People use it in conversation all the time. It of course shows up in regular novels and other kinds of writing. So you're going to have plenty of opportunities to see this and hear this in use. And the second thing is that this is totally optional. And what that means is you can begin to weave it into your own Japanese at your own pace. What I'd recommend is that going forward, when you find yourself using one of those three-part expressions as a relative clause, let's say, my smart friend, 頭がいい友達, take that as an opportunity to consciously try to use the got no substitution. So you would say, 頭のいい友達. And as you become more and more familiar with doing that yourself, then when you hear other people doing it and you read it, it'll make more sense too. All right, so that's going to wrap up our discussion of got no substitution. If you have any questions or comments about what we talked about, please let us know below. And if you're interested in reading Japanese stories that have this kind of discussion baked in, then check out satorireader.com. And if you're still working on some of the more foundational levels of Japanese, then check out our Human Japanese series as well. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.